blue wall. And then don't forget, there's 2 other Senate seats that are still on the balance as well. I know you already talked about Montana, which Republicans feel very confident about, but we also have Nevada and Arizona. Arizona Republicans were not that bullish on. They did not have high hopes for Kari Lake, the candidate there. The scenario in which they thought Kari Lake could win is the scenario that we see playing out right now, and that was a big Donald Trump victory that would bring her across the finish line. So there's no doubt that there are a lot of very happy people in the Senate Republican caucus. And this is going to be a very different looking Senate Republican caucus, one that might look a lot more like the House Republican caucus that we've covered over the past couple of election cycles. So there's no doubt that there's going to be a lot of change in Washington as a result of what we see playing out here.
Yeah, different leadership, too. Senator McConnell stepping aside there. Let's go to Kelly O'Donnell, who's also there, certainly is a veteran of the Hill. We await who will control the House of Representatives, and we may be waiting for weeks for that one. But, Kelly, what's your takeaway here?
Well, certainly if the Senate Republicans have this way of reshaping themselves, and it is without Mitch McConnell, who's decided he's not going to be in leadership. And so it will be more in the form of Donald Trump. And if Donald Trump becomes president again, then you have that kind of partnership where he will have more of an opportunity to drive the agenda. Now, if the House goes to the Democrats, then they have the counterweight, and they have the power of subpoena and the power to be an agitation to a Donald Trump if he returns to the White House. For Republicans, as Ryan mentioned and as we've talked about tonight, the expectation was that this was likely because there's a third of the Senate that is up every 2 years, 34 seats this time, and it was favorable territory for Republicans. But for the partnership between a White House and at least one chamber of the Senate, of the Congress, it makes such a difference. Now, Donald Trump has not always courted those Republicans. He has such a grasp over his party, not always wanting to work with them in terms of governing and getting things done. But he has infused his brand, his personality into this Republican caucus, and that will mean sort of a Trump-style reflection in the Senate, perhaps more than we saw in his first term, because you won't have Mitch McConnell in a leadership position.
All right, we want to go to Harris headquarters, Cedric Richmond, who is, of course, the head of the DNC, about to address the crowd there. Let's listen in.
Good evening, Howard. Good evening, HU. I want to say good evening to all of the Harris campaign, the campaign family. Thank you for all that you have done. Thank you for being here. Thank you for believing in the promise of America. We still have votes to count. We still have states that have not been called yet. We will continue overnight to fight to make sure that every vote is counted, that every voice has spoken. So you won't hear from the Vice President tonight, but you will hear from her tomorrow. She will be back here tomorrow to address not only the HU family, not only to address her supporters, but to address the nation. So thank you. We believe in you. May God bless you. May God keep you. And go HU and go Harris. Thank you all.
Richmond, who is, of course, the co-chair of the Harris campaign, and misspoke earlier, apologies for that, saying that we will not hear from Kamala Harris tonight, but we will hear from her tomorrow. We've got Julian Castro here. What do you make of that? What are your tea leaves showing you?
It reminds me of John Podesta coming out at the Jacob Javits Center around the same time. Maybe that was a little bit later in 2016.
And if I recall, the race hadn't been called.
Had not been.
When he first came out.
It was called probably an hour and a half later, if I remember correctly. Look, I think it's important to note that this is a different year. There are still votes to be counted. None of those battleground states have been counted, but it feels eerily similar to 2016.
The parallels are really striking. If you were there at the Javits Center, which I was, to see not the candidate herself come out, but to see, in this case, Cedric Richmond, just as John Podesta came out. And again, I think the themes, one of the questions that we were looking at in 2016 was the fact that Hillary Clinton didn't visit Michigan, for example. This was very different. Vice President Kamala Harris went everywhere.
She showed up in Wisconsin.
Of the
She showed up in
battleground
those
states,
blue wall
but
states.
again, her messaging, and we all noted this at the time, her closing messaging really focused on the issue of democracy, when polls showed issues like the economy, like reproductive rights, are really the top issues for voters. So that's undoubtedly one
although
thing
in our exit polls, threat to democracy is the number one issue. It's just that it's in the eye of the beholder, and it means different things. I mean, Mark Lauder's here, a veteran of Republican campaigns and the Trump campaign in 2020. I mean, a threat to democracy, I think, is, the pollsters, we're going to all have to come and workshop a different way of putting it, because so for some, for Democrats, it certainly means January 6th and some of those, extra legal, not legal moves to try to hold on to power in 2020. For Republicans, it might mean cultural changes to the way our way of life, things that threaten. It could be a number of cultural issues that they think are just as existential, and it's really about the direction of the country.
Yeah, well, obviously I don't speak for every Republican. I do think there are a lot, though, that believe the threat to democracy also is packing the Supreme Court. It is the use of the lawfare, whether it was in New York, whether it was the special counsel, for things that really, like, as we often describe it, the New York case was about accounting and a paperwork issue. And yet he was, fined hundreds of millions of dollars, faces jail time. So those kinds of things, I think, also resonate for many. But I know we've talked about a lot about the 2016, and I was on that campaign as well with then Governor Pence, obviously part of the Trump campaign. It reminds me of 2016 in so many ways because of the theory. It's not you have to win wow counties, or you have to do. I'll use the McDonald's reference because it's an iconic photo. He supersized 2016 and said, I'm going to grow my rural numbers, and then I'm going to take them up in another level even more.
Well, as we go to a commercial break, there's the side-by-side picture. If you were just tuning into all this, I think the pictures speak loudly. On the left, the Harris campaign headquarters for the night as people are packing up and leaving, told they will not see the candidate tonight as they process some unhelpful trends for them. On the right side, the Trump gathering in West Palm Beach tonight, where we have seen dancing and celebration. Again, the race has not been called yet, but they, like everyone else watching, some interesting trend lines that seem to be pointing in that direction. We'll take a break here. Still be with us, and we'll be right back.
60% of the vote in. I'm seeing a lot of red lining up and down Lake Michigan. And for a while, that
Americans turn to NBC News than any other news organization.
Welcome back to NBC's election night coverage. It is almost 1 a.m. here in the East with another poll about to close as we wait on numbers from some of the critical battleground states in the race for president.
We're covering not just the presidential race, though, but also both houses of Congress just made a big call in the Senate. Kristen Welker on the balance of power there, and Republicans have officially regained control of the United States Senate.
They've regained control of the United States Senate, which is a significant development, one that was expected. And now the question that we are asking is just how big will their margins be in the Senate? So right now it's 51-41. We're still waiting for a number of results. But among the top states that we're looking for, now that they have these pickups, which have given them control, Arizona, Ruben Gallego and Kari Lake, we still haven't called that race. The Montana race is such a fascinating one. Senator Jon Tester trying to win re-election against Tim Sheehy. Tim Sheehy is a somewhat controversial candidate, and yet it looks like Jon Tester could potentially be poised for defeat. We'll have to see how that race goes.
It's a very red state, Montana, so he was one of the most vulnerable incumbents.
Absolutely. And when Republicans were eyeing how are we going to win the Senate, this was the race that they continued to reference. We're also waiting for Pennsylvania. Senator Bob Casey looking for a fourth term against Dave McCormick, Trump-backed businessman Dave McCormick. So we're watching, and Tammy Baldwin, by the way, also in Wisconsin is looking for re-election.
How about Michigan? We've got an open seat, a Democratic retirement.
In Michigan, absolutely. You have Alyssa Slotkin and Mike Rogers running very close. And again, I keep making this point. Some of these Democratic candidates actually looked like they had a good shot at winning re-election. And then the polls have just completely narrowed, which is what we've seen at the top of the ticket as well. And we continue to ask this question, will we see any ticket splitters?
The ticket splitter, which just brings me right to Hallie. I think we were wondering if you might see, a Trump Slotkin in Michigan or
right.
Trump Baldwin in Wisconsin. We don't see a lot of ticket splitting in the modern political era.
That's exactly right, because people
now.
are divided. Let's see how this goes, though, because we haven't called some of these races, right, where these Democrats are vulnerable in some of these. I mean, listen, we're talking about the blue wall in some of these blue wall states. And remember why the margin matters in the Senate. Not just for funsies. It's because there's a couple of Republicans in the Senate who would be potentially likely to buck Donald Trump if he were to win the White House on some issues. I'm thinking Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski. If Republicans can build up that margin, that won't matter quite as much.
Yeah.
All right, well, we're still waiting to see how this all plays out tonight. We've got more ahead. Let's check back right now with the presidential race and the road to 270.
Coming up on 1 o'clock in the morning in the East, that's the road to 270. The map filling out 6 of 7 battleground states have been called. And we just got word from Harris headquarters and the co-chair of the campaign, Cedric Richmond, that we will not be seeing Kamala Harris tonight, but we will see her tomorrow. Let's go to Harris headquarters. Peter Alexander, our correspondent, right there. So what are you hearing? What is the decision-making process there?
Savannah, we did just hear from Cedric Richmond making the announcement to the thousands who had gathered here. Frankly, many of them had already left as we approach 1 o'clock, saying that they would not hear from the Vice President Kamala Harris tonight, instead saying that she would speak to her supporters, not just here at Howard University, her alma mater, but to the nation as well, in an address that would take place at some point tomorrow. No specifics on when that would occur. For those who have kept track of the Trump era, you'll remember in 2016, a very similar circumstance there at the Javits Center in New York City at Hillary Clinton headquarters, where one of her top aides, John Podesta, came out and spoke to the crowd saying she wouldn't be speaking. Ultimately, she conceded the next morning, Wednesday morning. So a lot of votes still out there. No plans for any concessions, certainly at this point. But I can tell you, in conversations we've had with a series of individuals, including a Democrat who was attending a donor event that was taking place at one of the glitzy hotels not far from where we are here in Washington, D.C., they say the atmosphere there was like a funeral. Another person said that the situation, in their words, was just, quote, not good right now. We did hear earlier from Jen O'Malley Dillon. She is the campaign share. She had what was in effect a sort of pep talk for the forces, the campaign staff, telling them all to get some sleep and that they would come back and finish this off strong tomorrow. So that's effectively where things are at the end of the evening. But I got to tell you, Savannah, on a day when so many those close to Kamala Harris really felt like they had the momentum, they felt like the vibes were on their side, it quickly appeared clear that, you know, despite her effort to say that we're not going back, that they may be returning to the figures that haunted Democrats back in 2016, where they just didn't have enough to defeat Donald Trump that go around. So many blank stares, glum faces, people not so much holding back tears, but certainly unable to crack a smile here. They had been handing out American flags early on. As some of the early numbers were out, they were cheering and waving those flags. But as the night progressed and they watched the returns come in, no more waving flags. In fact, they asked for the television to be muted here with the returns, with the exception of Hawaii, Colorado, other places that Harris won. They turned them on and got cheers for that. Instead, they blasted music to try to sort of distract from the situation, try to give a little pick-me-up to the people here.
All right, Peter, thank you so much. I want to go over to Garrett Haake, who's at Trump headquarters in Florida, where it looks like the party is still going. And, of course, the question is whether or not we will hear from the former president tonight.
Yeah, Savannah, Trump supporters reveling in the news that they're getting here in this ballroom just over the last half hour or so. Huge cheers in this room as the networks called Georgia for the former president, and a loud chorus of boos when Cedric Richmond took the stage in Washington to announce that Vice President Harris would not be speaking. There has been movement from Mar-a-Lago across the Intercoastal Waterway towards West Palm Beach of Trump supporters. The party there emptying out a lot of the folks he had been with. Governor Burgum, for example, other close Trump aides and allies making their way across the street. Still no sign of the former president here yet, Savannah.
Okay, thank you.
We've got another call to make here. I believe this is the state of New Mexico. NBC News projecting that Kamala Harris will win in New Mexico, 5 electoral votes. Here's the breakdown right now. You see the difference, 43,000, 95% of the vote in there, so very little left to count. Where does that bring us to in the road to 270? Donald Trump at 246, Harris now up to 194.
Let's go over to Tom Yamas, who's at the big board of Pennsylvania, and you've got some bellwether counties that are reporting in now, and it's a good news for Donald Trump.
Yeah, one in the east, one in the west. Let's start in the east. Northampton County, this is Easton, PA, right here, south central suburbs. 95% of the vote is in. Trump is there with 51%. Remember, Biden won this in 2020, so Trump able to flip that bellwether county. There's still some vote out, but it's unclear if Harris can catch up. Erie County. We haven't talked enough about Erie County tonight. This is one of those swing counties that we watch in western PA. Biden won it in 2020. Tonight, Trump is on top. There's about 3,000 votes still left to be counted here. It's unclear. She's going to have to get all those votes if she wants to flip that county back blue. Let's go to the collar counties in Philadelphia. Let's talk about what we have here. So we want to compare to 2020 to see how she's driving out the vote. Underperforming right now in Chester County. Still 20% of the vote is out there. Montgomery County, 86% of the vote is in. 62% for Biden. Again, 60%. She's underperforming there. We move down to Delco. 95% in, 62.9, slightly underperforming there. Philadelphia County, this is where she closed out her campaign with Lady Gaga and Oprah as well. There's still a lot of vote left to be counted, 20% or so. 81% was where Biden was at. She's at 78. And finally, Bucks County here. Trump has flipped this right now. There's still about 30% of the vote is out, 69%. He had 51. Biden did in 2020. Trump tonight with 50%. Still some vote to be counted there. But those aren't promising numbers in the collar counties right now. And the bellwethers, one in the east, one in the west, showing signs that Pennsylvania could turn red. Still a lot of vote out, guys. But this may be one of the reasons, and we don't know why Vice President Harris decided not to speak tonight, but this may be one of the reasons why the trend lines in Pennsylvania, from what we're seeing, if she doesn't win Pennsylvania, there is no longer a path for her. Right.
And you're seeing some of these same patterns in other states as well.
Wisconsin and Michigan as well. We're starting to look at the counties there. We walked you through Michigan and Wisconsin. Still a lot of vote out in those two battleground states. But again, those trend lines that we're following, we're searching these maps to see if there's any positive signs for the Democrats. And I got to be honest with you, the more I go through these counties, through all the battleground states, more and more what you see in the rural counties, Trump is overperforming. Harris is underperforming the counties she needs to win, guys.
Remember, if she doesn't win Pennsylvania, the other states don't matter. If he wins Pennsylvania, he goes to the White House.
Right. Whether it's a call or not, it functionally is. I don't know. Is the minute if we call Pennsylvania tonight, does he get to 270? I think so. Yeah.
That's right.
That's it.
That's right.
So
That's why it's ball game. I mean, that's
yes.
it. So.
And they're counting fast in Pennsylvania tonight as well. We're coming up on the top of the hour. I think we're going to have some projections to make. Yes. Don't forget.
We are going to hear from
one more state to go here.
Of Alaska right now.
Yes.
And NBC News projecting that it's, well, not projecting at all. We're saying it is too early to call on Alaska. And here's where the road to 270 stands right now. Harris with 194. Trump gaining ground now at 246 as he looks forward to scoring 270 electoral votes.
Okay, let's see the battlegrounds. Pennsylvania, we just discussed it. Too close to call right now with 92% of the vote in. Same story in Michigan, but we've been discussing how some of the trend lines are not positive for the vice president tonight. Michigan too close to call. Minnesota still too close to call at this hour. Of course, that's the home state of Governor Tim Walz, but too close to call right now with the what we have in here. Arizona too early to call. And in Wisconsin, too close to call. So I think, Tom, you've got Wisconsin. Yeah. We'll give you a chance to do the bow and the wow counties again. This is
bow, wow, wow, yippee-yo, yippee-yay. Okay, Madison, this is Dane County. For Democrats right now, she's doing just fine here. 75% is where Biden was in 2020. With 95% of the vote in, she's at 75%. That's fine for her. Milwaukee, we're going to be waiting on the biggest city and the biggest county in Wisconsin for a few more hours, I would say, maybe more than that. She's at 66%, but again, 40% of the vote in Milwaukee is not in. This is a big Democratic county, so maybe she can run her numbers up there. But then when we look at the wow counties here, Ozaki, this is the O in the wow, 81%. Trump was at 55.2. He's almost matching where he was 4 years ago. Let's go over to Washington County, 68, overperforming there. Let's go down to Waukesha. Slightly underperforming, still some of the votes out there. But these two counties just south of Milwaukee, they're still part of the Milwaukee media market. Racine, 51%. He's overperforming there, but still half the vote is out there. And then Kenosha, 95% in, overperforming there as well. These are counties that were blue under Obama. Trump was able to flip them over and then hold them as well. We can go to the bow counties now. This is around Green Bay. 56% Trump overperforming there. We'll come down. Sorry, let me go over here to Winnebago. 50, again, overperforming. And we go to Outagamie, again, slightly overperforming. Guys, so as we study this map, let me go to some of the Democratic strongholds, see how she's doing. La Crosse, 95%. So, look, it's a slight drop. But, again, when we're talking about a margin of 20,000 votes, that's what it was in 2016 and 2020. You want to be on top. You want to be overperforming everywhere you look. She's about at the same mark, slightly higher, but not by much, in Eau Claire. And then another one we're watching, Sauk. This is one of those bellwethers, 50%, matching Biden 4 years ago. 95% of the vote is in. And we'll look at Dorr. That's the one we're watching. She's on top, but only by about 466 votes. It's unclear if he'll catch her. She may take Dorr County. It's still unclear in Wisconsin what's going to happen, guys.
All right, well, back with our panel now, including our guest, Jim Messina, former White House Deputy Chief of Staff under President Obama. Mark Lauder remains with us. He was part of the 2020 campaign for Donald Trump. Great to have you both here. Jim, when you see those trends that Tom has been walking through, and there's a consistent of underperformance, what does that tell you about the Harris campaign?
Well, the county that Tom just walked through that really scared me the most, I ran President Obama's campaign, and I was obsessed with Bucks County in Pennsylvania. Where Bucks County goes, we go. And we spent more time and resources there, and the Harris campaign did too. They had huge operations on the ground. The fact that they're not going to win Bucks County is really difficult and starts to say to folks, hey, you know, we have a problem here. The other thing is there just may not be enough turnout in Philly to get there. And I've spent my entire adult life waiting for Philly to come in. I just have anger. I hate the Eagles because of you know, every 4 years we're having this discussion. Usually it's enough. 6 out of the last 7 elections, Democrats have won Pennsylvania. Tonight, we're not sure there's enough out there.
But we were having the discussion several times this evening about, you know, has there been a failure to recognize that the electorate is changing, that everything you think you may have known doesn't represent what we see today.
Well, what those numbers show me tonight is Democrats have a rural problem. We are absolutely bleeding votes in historic numbers. Barack Obama did very well in rural America. It started with Hillary. Biden did a little bit better. But when you look at the numbers, what's happening tonight, the gender gap is there. Women are performing in the suburbs. That's not the problem. The problem is we're just doing 2 to 4 points worse in rural, and we're not getting the big turnout in the cities because we're bleeding some of the young voters you guys have been talking about.
But also, Donald Trump keeps finding more voters in these rural areas. I mean, I think there's, you often hear in these political shows that you all host, you hear about the ceiling that Donald Trump has. Oh, he can't get over 48. He can't get over 49%. He's found more voters, and we're seeing it tonight when he's overperforming in some of these ruby red rural districts.
Which, by the way, for the third time you run for president, that just never happens. And I really do think that his campaign has figured out a way to do this and really target some of these demographics. Obviously, the young white male was the right thing to do. Getting into minority communities was the right thing to do. Democrats need an entire autopsy if it goes the way it looks like to say, what do we need to do here?
But does Trump transcend politics as we know it? I mean, that he was been able to be as successful as he had by sticking his finger in the eye of the political establishment, of going where no other candidate could or had gone before.
What is true is Donald Trump has always been underestimated by Democrats and has always figured out a way to juice turnout in ways that we thought were both abhorrent and didn't make sense to Democrats, but clearly has worked tonight. And this is that was the story of 2016, and it is the story of tonight.
You know what's interesting to me? I'm thinking back to the Republican National Convention when we were all sitting there, and Hulk Hogan came and ripped off his shirt in sort of that moment of sort of super masculinity. And one of the conversations that we had at the time was about this, and it just, as it's named, so-called bro vote, right? The young male voter. And the Trump strategy all along had been supercharge the base, boost that turnout, crank it up big time, get those so-called low propensity voters. People, listen, young guys typically don't show up to vote all the time, and they typically don't show up to vote consistently. I will tell you that the Trump campaign has, for a bit now, been feeling good about being able to get those low propensity, those people who don't typically vote, out to the polls, specifically with young people.
What's so interesting, because we heard anecdotally, again, from some of our correspondents about frat houses, fraternity brothers getting really into voting for Donald Trump. So I don't know if this is, we could call it the bro wall, is that somehow Donald Trump has gotten these low propensity young male voters to come out and vote for him.
It is the hardest demographic in American politics. Males under 30 to turn out. They're the lowest turning out segment. I've spent hours on your show, you and I, talking about running up the numbers with women. And, the Harris campaign did some of that tonight. The Trump campaign decided, let's just give her that and let's go grow our electorate differently. And it looks like tonight that worked.
We've got another result on one of the abortion referenda. Well, let's go to Laura Jarrett in the newsroom. Laura, what do you have?
Yeah, Lester, this was another ballot measure, this one in Arizona, where overwhelmingly by a vote of 62%, that ballot amendment has now passed. Again, this would be a constitutional amendment that would enshrine a right to an abortion up to the point of viability, which is roughly 24 weeks of pregnancy. Obviously, a big difference in this battleground state, where currently it's a 15-week restriction on the right to abortion. So a big difference there. Again, we haven't yet made a prediction on the ultimate race for president in that state. But again, the ballot amendment we can project has passed there, Lester.
All right, Laura, thanks very much.
And what's interesting on that front, there's also another ballot initiative in Arizona that has to do with immigration. And the thinking was that maybe that would turn out, if people were going to turn out based on this abortion ballot initiative, maybe they would also turn out based on the immigration ballot initiative, that those would maybe lean Trump. But the Trump campaign has thought that there would be, quote unquote, ticket splitters or ballot initiative splitters, people who would back former President Trump in Arizona, but also back this ballot initiative that, as Laura reports, has just passed.
One of the things that I think is so interesting is we're talking about expanding the amount of voters who came out to vote for Donald Trump is this decision that he made not to campaign with Nikki Haley. And a lot of people thought, oh, that's going to be a big misstep. To your point, Jim, it was his way of calculating, I'm going to focus on driving out the mail vote, because a lot of people thought, boy, that